These are 2 tips for every legend in Apex. Let's go. First up is Wraith. Number 1, try to trick enemies into chasing you with Wraith's tactical whenever possible. I'm sure all of us have been baited before by a sweaty bald Wraith as you hit her for a good amount of damage, then she Qs and you try to chase her only for her to turn and burn on you from a more advantageous angle. This is something that will be situational, but it is something that all good Wraith players utilize. Try to be familiar with your surroundings and always have a game plan of where you're trying to get to in your queue, especially a position that you think will be good to turn and hold from. There's a lot of outplay with Wraith's tactical in certain moments, so don't just think of it as this one-dimensional tool of, oh, I took damage and I need to try to get away. It can be used for that, but it can also be used for much more. Number 2, if you ever want to set up a trap with Wraith's portal, aka a kidnap, you can jump off of a box or something with height while setting the portal simultaneously. Then, portal towards an enemy team in a building and save your phase for right when you're going to get close to that enemy. Hopefully they'll lose sight of you for a second while you do this, and then you can quickly set the portal on one of the enemies. If you do it right, they will be forced to take the portal accidentally, and your teammates on the other side should be able to knock them. And since the portal is going to be off of the ground, the enemy will not be able to crawl back into the portal, and you'll wind up getting an easy kill. Gibraltar. When bubbling on uneven surfaces, be sure to use those gaps to your advantage with things like grenades. This can be useful in situations like here in this clip, but if you're not careful with your bubble placement, having it on an uneven surface could screw you or your teammates over, so you must try to keep this in mind when using this ability. Number 2, when using Gibby's bubble and taking a close-up fight in it, it's super important to control the right amount of space. This could look like you're controlling the front, the back, or even a specific side of it, but don't lose that space you control by venturing too far outside of the bubble, especially if it means that that space will be then taken from you by your enemy. This ability is yours. Don't use it and let an enemy team occupy more space in it so that you lose your edge. Really good Gibraltars are masters at controlling the right amount of space in a bubble fight because they know it will result in them taking less damage due to the cover they have available while simultaneously being able to output more damage from a more favorable angle. Ash. Always use your tether when you know an opponent is around some form of cover. This will most likely still hit them as the area of denial on this ability is pretty large. If you know they're behind a box, just shoot the tether slightly over it or to the side of the box. It doesn't need to be a direct contact as long as they're in the range of the snare. When using this ability on the offensive, if you do wind up connecting with your opponent, try to capitalize on the effects of this ability as their movement will be confined for a brief moment, and this could be all the edge you need in the fight to win it. Number 2, most will know that you can scan death boxes with Ash's passive to reveal any remaining enemies that are still alive. However, a good little trick to know is that when hovering over the death box, if there's a little knife icon, that means the attackers are still alive. This will basically always confirm if you should use her passive to scan the death boxes or not. If you don't see the knife above the death box, whoever killed that person is no longer alive in the game. Next up is Horizon. Horizon doesn't really need any tips, seeing how she's the most popular legend right now and all of you playing her already get to float up in the air, fly around, and one-clip me. So let's talk about a counter for dealing with some Horizon players. If a Horizon ults your team, always try to team fire the ultimate. This will severely speed up the time it takes to destroy it and can save you all from a lot of potential damage that may be on its way with arc stars or other throwables. This won't always be possible because at times good Horizons will know to throw the nades right after or before the ultimate lands so that even if you try destroying the ult, you're still susceptible to taking damage from the throwables. And Horizon is probably then landing on you with no audio. Number 2, I'll actually give you guys a tip for her. I don't recommend doing this unless you're really in a pinch, but you can use Horizon's tactical to block doorways if you need to escape or if you need to stall. This has helped me out many times, and it can also work if you want to be annoying, but also really smart at the same time and hold a team out of a building in an end zone scenario. They could get potentially trapped in there and wind up dying from the zone damage, or you're going to be forcing them out in your line of sight, which could also be favorable. Catalyst. You can only reinforce 2 doorways at a time. This is a total of up to 4 doors if the doorways are double doors, and this passive is insanely good in the right moments. So my tip for you is if you're holding a building with many different entry points and exits, you can try and force the enemies to come from one specific direction by leaving the door you want them to come through untouched. This can make the enemies fall right into your hand, and you should be able to find an advantage over them. Also remember, even if a door is broken, Catalyst can repatch that doorway up and create a new door. For these reasons listed above, you generally always want to gravitate towards close range fights in buildings so that you can make the most of your passive. You could also place your tactical in front of doorways too if you want to try to potentially block some enemies to come from that way as well. Number 2, Catalyst Tactical is pretty good, and I'm sure the devs will tweak it in the future to make it a bit better, but these spikes will do 15 damage per second to enemies, and they have a pretty far range on them. So don't hesitate to shoot them at enemies from somewhat of a distance, especially if you know they're behind some form of cover. Since this ability can cover a good amount of ground, it will force the enemy to move out of the way, take damage, or move and try to destroy the tactical, which all could be solid opportunities for you to close out on the enemy's elimination. Seer. Number 1. Many players have gotten better at this, but I still see a lot of errors from my enemies and sometimes my random teammates. While using Seer's ultimate, where you throw the ult down will create a dome around where it lands. The orb in the middle can be destroyed. So you must be throwing it in places behind some cover, or at the very least, not in line of sight of where you believe your enemies to be. This ability only lasts for 30 seconds. It does have a short cooldown, but you want to make the most of those 30 seconds, so don't be placing this in spots where the ultimate could get destroyed quickly. Number 2, Seer's tactical can do so many things. Cancel heals, cancel revives, pause abilities, reveal location, reveal health and shield bar. So for these reasons, it's often way better to use this ability during a fight as opposed to the opening of a fight. With a legend like Bloodhound, you're going to want to be using their tactical before you go into the fight to see where everyone is at. But for Seer, you don't really want to do it like this because his passive is already going to tell you where the enemies are. So think of this tactical as more of a canceling ability. It's best to use after some damage is dealt or a knock has happened. Now, on the contrary, if you're approaching a third party, opening up a fight with Seer's tactical could be the right move because you may be able to cancel that heal or the opponent's revive, giving you and your whole team a huge advantage. For Crypto, number 1, check banners for nearby enemy teams with your drone and be sure to ping the banner so that Crypto relays a voice line to his teammates, letting them know how many teams are in the area or if there is no squads nearby. Although I wish this ability worked for Crypto without him having to be in his drone, it will be important yet sometimes inconvenient to hop in and out of the drone to check these banners. But I think it's worth doing, especially if you're in the ranked mode so that you can determine if it's the right fight to take or not. I also recommend checking these fairly often if you're concerned about your surroundings, as things can change in just a few seconds. 1 second you could check and no one's within the 200-meter range, but then you check 5 seconds later and all of a sudden 2 teams have emerged. This is especially important on Broken Moon, where enemies can use zip rails to travel large distances and be within that 200-meter range faster than you may think. Number 2, when using Crypto's ultimate, the EMP, it's super important to time this correctly, especially if you're trying to EMP and then follow up with a push on the enemy. First off, you need to be close enough to the enemy to EMP, but not so close that you'll take damage yourself. The goal should be to play off of that 50 damage that it deals to each enemy. If you're too far away, they'll have plenty of time to just heal. If you're too close, you will deal damage to yourself, but you also could slow and stun your teammates, which would wind up being terrible, especially if they're too close to the enemy while the EMP is going off. So although this may seem like a straightforward tip because it's nothing too advanced in nature, pulling off a successful EM push is actually very difficult and is very situational. This is a delicate process, so learn these intricacies and try to execute on them while playing as Crypto. Real quickly, if you are enjoying this video and you aren't already subscribed, well, I hope you'll consider doing so. And if you appreciate all of the work that went into making this video and you want to further support my channel, then feel free to drop a super thanks. This is YouTube's new tipping feature. Regardless, I appreciate any and all of your guys' support, so back to the video. Caustic. Number 1, while using Caustic's traps, you can place the trap on a door to block them and see if an opponent tries to kick the door down. This can also work if you want to kick the door yourself, but either way, if an enemy is on the other side of that door while it gets broken down, the trap will activate and you could have a brief opportunity to one-clip them or pump them with a shotgun while they're taking gas damage and being slowed. This is the ultimate cat and mouse play with a legend like Caustic, and it's worked for me hundreds of times. Number 2, with Caustic, I always try to force my enemies into a funnel whenever possible, meaning I'm assessing the area I'm in and I'm using my gas to block off entry or exit points, or I'm deterring specific angles so that I'm forcing my opponents to attack me in a specific direction. This is probably my favorite aspect to Caustic's kit. It's a full-on chess move while you're thinking 3 steps ahead of them. And the good news is, for a legend like this, all of his abilities complement this sort of play. So you can use his ultimate, up to 6 of his traps, and even his passive will play a role here. And this is what you want to try to do with Caustic, especially if you're in a disadvantaged situation, like you're playing with a man down or something like that. Caustic's at his best when he makes enemies attack him on his terms. Valkyrie. Val can destroy doors with her tactical, the Missile Swarm, and this works against a Catalyst reinforced door. So definitely keep this in mind in Season 15 if you're going against a Catalyst. Number 2, make sure to emote in the air when using a Valkyrie's ultimate. This makes it so that it's much harder for you to take damage while you're flying. This is actually kind of pay to win in Apex if you think about it. I mean, you'll see the pros do this every time they Valk ult in LGS because they know some of the animations that the legends do while emoting in the air are nearly impossible to hit. I mean, obviously it's already difficult to track an enemy flying that far up in the air, but when Valkyrie is doing backflips and whatnot, well yeah, you get the point. Take advantage of this on any legend that you have emotes unlocked with. Bloodhound. Now, Bloodhound is one of the legends that doesn't really have some crazy tips for them, but ultimately, you want to make sure you're scanning every time you have it in the direction where you think enemies are or could be, and doing so right before you're about to engage in that fight. Once the fight ensues, you're on a 25-second cooldown with this tactical. And if the fight is still going on when you have the scan available again, then obviously you want to use it again during that fight as well. This does sound obvious, like duh, use their ability. But the reality is, a lot of Bloodhounds sometimes don't time their scan correctly, and that can wind up making a huge difference in the outcome of the fight. Number 2, when you're in Bloodhound's ultimate, you get scans more quickly, 8 seconds, and the scan animation is also much faster than the normal one. So it's important to balance out the scans during the ult when you're presumably fighting. So when you need to reload behind cover or pop a shield battery, and it's safe to, go ahead and scan before you do these things so that your teammates can play off of that information at your disposal. Don't waste that precious time while you're in the ultimate getting these extra scans that are quicker to do some other tasks that may be secondary to what's going on in the fight. Remember, this ultimate does not just assist you, it assists your teammates too. So keep this in mind. Wattson. When having Wattson fences down and you're anticipating an enemy will cross them, the best thing you can do is get close to them. Why? Because when someone gets electrocuted by a fence, they not only take 20 damage, but they also get stunned for 3 seconds. This means their look sensitivity and aim sensitivity are both hindered. The closer you are to the enemy, the more space they will need to cover, and with that stun occurring, it will basically be impossible for them to track you correctly. Number 2, when placing Wattson's ultimate, it's always best to be mindful of line of sight. You want to put it in the place where it's least likely going to get shot out and destroyed. This may seem obvious, but contrary to my experience in Apex, it really isn't. Beyond that though, if you're ever in a pinch, you can place her ult and block a doorway with it. This can still serve its purpose and can potentially force an enemy into another doorway that you may already have fences up at. So it could be a win-win. Loba. Now Loba is also one of these legends that doesn't have a ton of complex tips. Her ultimate's very straightforward, and so is her passive. However, her tactical has some room for nuance, and overall, she's a pretty strong legend. So number 1, when using Loba's bracelet, it's really important to be using it as an escape tool or a slight repositioning tool. It's rarely going to be good when used as an aggressive ability. The main reason for this is the animation that the bracelet does upon landing. Loba will take a second or two before she's able to pull her weapon out. So when I'm using this ability, I'm always accounting for my landing and the time it'll take for me to get my gun back out. I never want to get caught taking damage while I'm finishing the bracelet animation, and this is a much different ability than say someone like Horizon's, where she can use her weapon while moving in her lift. Also, an enemy will be able to see the location in which you're going to land at while using a Loba bracelet. So they may already have you lined up in their sights, and you want to avoid those situations. Number 2. When using Loba's ultimate, I think there's 2 issues I've witnessed from my randoms and from coaching. First is players don't place this down as frequently as they could. This has a very short cooldown, and I just played a game the other day. It took my random Loba teammate 5 minutes from where we landed to place it down. The ultimate has a very short cooldown, so use it frequently as long as you have some safe space to use it in. The second issue is when some players don't use their discretion when they're looting her ultimate. Let's say you have no shields or very few and you're desperately in need of some ammo, but you could also use a better armor. Because the ultimate goes in order of weapons, ammo, helmet, knockdown, backpack, etc., it's easy to get distracted at the stuff at the top you could use but may not be necessary for the things you absolutely need. Remember, you get unlimited ammo with this ability, but you can only take 2 items from her shop. Choose wisely and just don't go for things that aren't as important if you're in dire need of something that will help you stay alive. Fuse. Don't get greedy with your tactical. With this legend, it's easy to substitute your weapons for his abilities. Most fuses, when taking a good amount of damage, will re-peak an angle to send out one of his knuckle clusters, and in most cases, this is a bad habit to get into. If the enemy is good, they will most likely anticipate you doing this and kill you when you re-peak. I've noticed a lot of fuses love to do this, and I've caught myself doing it before too. Most players would not attempt this risky re-peak if they were on any other legend, and so although this is situational, there could be a couple examples where re-peaking with your knuckle cluster could yield positive results, like if the enemy is very, very low and you know they're going to heal behind some piece of cover, and your knuckle cluster may be able to finish them off. But by and far, it's better to just heal right away instead of getting greedy for an extra 5 to 20 damage on your enemy, especially if it's going to set you back in time for what it will take you to heal back up. Number 2, Fuse's ultimate is great at causing some chaos, and although this ability tends to be very inconsistent in terms of its damage and utility, it can still be used to zone off enemies in choke points or even force them to a confined area for a short amount of time. You can ADS with this ultimate, and this can be helpful so that you'll place it more accurately from a longer distance, but it can also be used to scout your nearby areas to see if enemies are around you. Fuse can take damage from this ability, so placing it around enemies and then using gunfire or other throwables like grenades or knuckle clusters are going to be your best friend here. Mad Maggie. Maggie's ultimate destroys doors, and this can be used in an aggressive approach on a team in a building. Typically, the ball will bust down the door and then continue to roll around in the building, most likely bumping into the enemy, and they will wind up taking damage, be slowed, stunned, and have their vision blurred briefly. So you want to try to capitalize on this if you hit an enemy with your wrecking ball. Although it's not a ton of damage, you should have the draw on them briefly because of this slowing and stunning effect. However, keep in mind, Maggie is susceptible to these same things, the damage, the stunning, the vision blur, all from her own ultimate, so try not to get hit by it when using it. Number 2, when using Maggie's tactical, make sure you're placing it behind any reasonable geography that could deal the most amount of damage. Now, this doesn't always have to be a wall where you think your opponent is behind. It could be through a roof or a floor where you know an enemy is above or below you. Or while you're in something like the zipline building, you could place the riot drill at the very edge of the floor, pointing out towards the zipline shaft, preventing any enemies from coming up to the floor without you knowing. This ability is also very blinding when you get hit by it, since it's basically a flamethrower. So yeah, you can use this to your advantage too when you know an enemy is getting burnt by it. Pathfinder. Now this is a pretty well-known tip by now in Season 15, but it's still really helpful, and I'm sure a lot of you won't know this. You want to press jump right when your grapple connects so that you get more momentum, more height, more speed, just a better grapple overall. This can work in a few different ways. Let's say you need to grapple the ground or something ground level to go further or higher and land on some form of height. Well, pressing jump will be how you execute this. If you need to grapple a roof, you can press jump and come at the roof straight on. But if you want to grapple something above you and swing from it, do like a half circle and land on top of it, you don't need to press jump. This is more of a sweeping grapple. If you mess up the timing of the jump, it will have an adverse effect on most of your grapples and could get you killed if you're in a bad spot. So practice this in the firing range or throughout the map in some downtime and master this. Number 2, since Pathfinder's grapple is on a variable cooldown, which is contingent on how far he last traveled while using it, well, it's important to be super mindful of this timer on the cooldown. The best Pathfinders are always keeping tabs on if they have their grapple available as they head into a fight, or if they don't, how much longer until it's back available. This may sound simple, but you don't want to be overcommitting to something that you could potentially just grapple out of if all you need to do is wait 2 or 3 seconds. So be mindful of this timer in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen as you begin to try and master this legend. Rampart. When using Rampart's walls, it's very important to recall the walls if you leave that position. You never want to leave those walls up for an enemy to come by and take them over, and then all of a sudden they're using your own abilities against you. This is one of the trickiest parts about Rampart, because although she's sort of like Wattson and Caustic, those two legends' abilities cannot be used against them or their teammates like Rampart's can. So to recall your walls, it should just be your alternate interact key. For me on controller, it's down on the D-pad, and I think for mouse and keyboard, it's H, unless you have changed the keybind. Number 2, when using Rampart's minigun, Sheila, always make sure the gun is already spinning before you go and challenge an opponent. Although it only takes a second or two for this gun to wind up, that can be a huge difference from your opponent getting the draw on you and killing you quicker. I always make sure I'm behind cover, like her walls or something, and make sure Sheila is spinning up, ready to go, and then I try to peek out and get kills with it. This ultimate is very strong, and the time to kill on this is very fast, but it can get outgunned if Rampart is caught off guard by a surprise attack. Lifeline. Now, Lifeline is also one of these legends that doesn't have some complex kit, but it's often when and where you use her abilities that wind up making the biggest difference. So for the first tip, just don't revive your teammates if they're in the wide open and they're just gonna get thirsted. If it's the only possible time to do the revive, then make sure you stand in front of your teammate who's getting revived so that you can provide some cover fire for them and honestly be a bit of a meat shield. Most enemies will try to secure the kill on the revive as it's sort of the smart thing to do. But so many lifelines either just tap to revive in a vulnerable area and then walk away winding up, leaving the teammate just to get fully killed, or even worse, some teammates expect a revive when they're just in a bad spot and it's not a good time or place for Lifeline to try to stick a revive. Obviously this is nuanced, but hopefully you get the point from this. Number 2, this is also not a crazy complicated tip, but if you're low on health and shields, always make sure to place your drone down first so that you can pop a shield while the drone is healing your health at the same time. This is true multitasking at play, but this will ultimately lower the time it takes for you to get fully healed, and therefore you'll be able to come back into the fight much sooner. Revenant. Now, Revenant has one of the best passives in the game, and you can truly pull off some crazy plays with it. So learn to utilize his crouch walk as you sneak up on enemies. This will often provide very little audio to your opponents, and will most likely throw them off guard if you do it correctly. I like to use my tactical as a little bit of cover while doing this so that it's pretty difficult for them to see me and hear me at the same time. But I also recommend utilizing his climbing passive so that you can take high ground in a silent stalker way and definitely catch your opponents off guard. This works on so many different areas of the map where you would just otherwise have no means to reach that high ground. So take advantage of this while playing as Revenant. Number 2, you can use his ult to pull off a risky revive or banner retrieval if the situation calls for it. His ultimate is essentially a free push, but at times you may be down on numbers and you may need to take some risks. So using his ultimate for things like this have proven to be pretty successful in my experience. Newcastle. Newcastle's ultimate won't work in some buildings or areas that have short ceilings. This can cause many problems in certain buildings on World's Edge and some other places on the rest of the maps. Now this is due to his animation that makes Newcastle lunge forward and higher while he plants the wall down, and it has screwed me up a few times, so when you're in buildings, be mindful of your surroundings before you're about to place his ultimate down. Number 2, always make sure to get the best knockdown shield you can while playing as Newcastle. This will make the biggest difference with your revives. While reviving teammates, Newcastle can move them pretty swiftly. Try to pull them to some safe location during the revive so that when they come back up from it, they will have some space and time to heal before they go back into the fight. Of course, Newcastle's tactical and ultimate can pair extremely well with this passive if you need to have some form of cover to retreat your down teammates to. So make sure you're utilizing all of his abilities to really reach Newcastle's full potential. Vantage. When you go to use Vantage's tactical and you want to land in a specific area, instead of waiting for the double jump at the end, you can crouch midair and it will stop your momentum. This will also allow you to pull out your weapon faster if you find yourself using her tactical on the more aggressive side. I actually love doing this to control my momentum in a little bit more of a predictable direction. Number 2. Try to be excessive with Vantage's ultimate. Every 40 seconds you get a new bullet in her sniper. And if you use this early game, you can 2-tap an enemy on white armor. I'll be honest, I think this ability as a whole is actually sort of broken. This sniper is basically hit scan. The bullet is huge, which means you don't even have to be completely aiming at the enemy for it to connect. And it also stacks in damage, so hitting the same enemy twice is crazy strong. I actually carry ultimate accelerants with this legend and I really utilize her sniper. I recommend you do too. Just don't do it to me or we'll have some problems. Next up, Bangalore. While using Bangalore's ultimate or even going up against one, you can nearly always find a safe spot within the ultimate's range to avoid damage from her missiles. Now, since the missiles cover so much area and land fairly spread out from one another, it's usually possible to avoid these explosions altogether. Now, whether or not you'll be able to avoid the gunfire from the opponents as well that's a whole other story, but this ability was actually made to be offensive with it, meaning you throw it as the missiles are landing, you're running through it, trying to attack your opponents. Now, it doesn't always work out like that, but that was Apex's idea behind it. Number 2, teaming up with scanning legends can be huge for Bangalore, particularly a legend like Bloodhound. I've actually seen some pros running this comp lately, but what you do is use Bangalore's smoke on or nearby an enemy team as your Bloodhound scans them, and it can create a huge advantage for your team if done correctly. It's also really difficult for them to counter unless they have a Bloodhound as well, or they have digital threats, which isn't always super common. Octane. Just because you can go super fast doesn't mean you always should. Most Octanes run way too far ahead of their teammates, wind up so far out of position, and get killed for it. You have to really use your discretion while playing this legend, because while yes, it's fun to go fast, you still lose a fifth of your health while doing so, and that can really add up. Number 2, if you are fighting with your team and you want to take advantage of stimming up close while in an engagement, well, make sure to take advantage of hip firing too. Octane gets a tighter bullet spread on his hip fire when he is stimming. This could prove to be effective in a 1v1 close encounter, but certainly keep a tab on your health bar so you don't wind up over stimming. Mirage. When sending out a decoy with whatever button is your tactical, you can just hold the button down for a few seconds, and when you let go of it, it will automatically control the decoy for you. This can help you in moments where sending out the generic decoy that just runs and then comes to a stop will not be as effective against your opponents because they know it's not the real Mirage. So for me, I just hold down my LB button and let go after a few seconds, and the decoy is automatically controlled. Number 2, the best way to be using Mirage as a whole is to be spamming his tactical and ultimate whenever you're in a fight. But a major key to successfully bamboozling an enemy is to send decoys out from a position where they don't see it actively happen. See, if I can get behind some cover and then activate my ultimate and then swing out, I have a much better chance that my enemy won't know which is the real me until I start firing. However, if I just send the decoy out right in front of them, any experienced player will know who the real Mirage is and will have essentially neutralized my abilities. If you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching, and if you're interested in 6 tips to help improve your aim in Season 15, well, I covered everything in this video here. Check it out next. Peace!